Hi, everybody. Welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven, and we are joined today by Joel Trammell. He is a management educator with 30 years of CEO experience. He is CEO and founder of Khorus Systems, a business management system that empowers CEOs to lead high-performance organizations. You can learn more about him at his website, joeltrammell.com. So before I tell you a little bit more about him, Joel, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Great to be with you, Mark.
So Joel is, he's got a long list of things that he does, and maybe we will hear more about that today. He is the owner of Texas CEO Magazine and currently serves as the CEO and chairman at iGrafx. Joel is more recently the author of the upcoming book titled The Manager's Playbook: Make Exceptional People Management Your Competitive Advantage, and that's due to be released January 2022, right, Joel?
That's great.
So Joel is based in Austin, a city that I've lived in that was going back 20 years ago. So first question real quick, I don't know if it's a quick answer. Is it a mistake for people to move to Austin?
You should have got here 20 years ago. We moved here in 92. And so certainly it was a very different town then, but still the things that attract people. I mean, the picture behind me shows you the view, which most people that haven't been to Texas think you're in California or something. And so the terrain's interesting, the weather's good, the people are great, the food's good. And other than house prices escalating 30 or 40% year over year, things are great.
And the traffic.
The traffic. Yeah.
The traffic was bad when I moved there in 1999. For one, I was really struck by the hill country and the lakes and the rivers, and there is a lot of natural beauty. But even then, I think the longer term residents were saying, please, people, stop moving here. But no, but that wave didn't stop.
Yeah, we should have built the wall. We just should have built it around Austin instead of the border,
Well, now that I'm in California, I thought you were going to say to keep the Californians out. But
yes, that's where a lot of them have come from, for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, Austin is a great place, and I'm glad you could join us here, Joel. We'll talk more about your book and your other work, but as we usually do here, thinking back at the different things that you've done, what would you say is your favorite mistake, Joel?
Well, I got to take you back probably to the first venture-backed company I did. So we're going back to 1999 in Austin, Texas, when I would wake up every morning and read the Monday morning section of the paper. It was called Tech Monday. And so I'd read about all the tech companies that had gotten funded. And at the time, I'd run a small business, sold that business. And so, starting a business was not something that was scary to me at all. But I'd never done something at a kind of a larger scale. And so my wife, who's a 4.0 PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Texas, had been working for a company called Schlumberger here in town, and she had become kind of an expert in network management and analyzing large-scale networks, which at the time, there really wasn't a lot of expertise in how you ran a large network, especially from a performance perspective, which was kind of her expertise. And so I began to believe that there was an opportunity to build a business. And so we started out and got in touch with some venture capitalists, and we had a product, what I would call a very alpha type product running on Schlumberger's network. And we had, myself and her, and we managed to raise $11 million to start a business, which, it was kind of crazy at the time. And looking back, you'd have to be much further along to raise that kind of money. But there was kind of a frenzy at that point in time. And so we raised $11 million, and now you got to make it work. And so, she had the technical end of the business, tied up. She knew she was the kind of the world expert in that area of the business. I felt like I knew kind of broadly how to run a business, knew a little bit about everything, but certainly I thought we needed marketing help to tell our story. And that's where my mistakes kind of start, is how do you find a good marketing person? And so I started out, you ask some people and you try to get some recommendations. And the first guy I talked to that was recommended to me had written a book, and it was a real book. And, this going back 20 something years ago, now everybody's got their book that they've published, or at least ebook they've done. But at that time, having a real book that was in bookstores was kind of a big deal, right? So I was very impressed that he had this book on marketing. And So I hired him to run marketing for us. And of course, this is an early stage startup. And so there was a lot of work to do. But I found out that marketing VPs sometimes don't like doing work. They like hiring people to do work. And so first thing he did is he came in and started hiring junior people. And I learned that, that wasn't going to get the job done first. And that the key part of marketing is market, that you have to actually understand the market. And we were in a very technical market of computer networking, and he understood zero about the typical customer in that market. And so, it was pretty obvious. And so, within about a quarter, I had to go back and tell the board, hey, I hired this marketing exec. I told you how great he was. Now I got to fire him. So that was marketing exec number one. So then I learned my lesson. I said, well, we got to have somebody who really understands the market. That's the mistake I made. And so I went out and found somebody who'd been an analyst in the market. So was very familiar, knew the market very well. But he lived in Denver. And so we had a very earnest conversation from the beginning that, hey, you're moving to Austin, right? And because this is a startup and my wife and I are working 80 hours a week in this thing. And, we need somebody to dive in and get work done and make it happen. And he, of course, assured me, yeah, he was moving to Austin, Texas. Well, first few weeks, he's flying in from Denver. He's showing up at 11 or 12 on Monday morning. He's Thursday afternoon, he's saying bye and getting on the airplane and going back, spending Friday, Saturday, Sunday in Denver, So, of course, immediately I'm like, oh, but you're moving to Austin. Oh, yeah, I'm moving to Austin, and of course, that went on for weeks, which turned into months and turned into me having to go to the board and tell them that the second marketing VP that I hired was not the right guy.
So just to jump in real quick, so I'm sure you were talking to VP number 2. Was he just kicking the can down the road of like, no, Joel, I'm working on it, but didn't seem like it?
Yeah, he was, he wasn't sure. It was a startup, right? He wasn't sure it was going to be successful. He wanted to maybe have more proof points, or before he made a commitment, see that things were going to, knock it out of the park, whatever. And of course, with every startup, things, don't happen as quickly as you'd like.
Right.
And so he just wasn't kind of really willing to jump in and sell the house in Denver and make the move to Austin and make that kind of commitment.
Yeah. Because sometimes people are in a position where they could get an apartment or, be in a hotel to be there from Monday morning to Friday afternoon, but not, people aren't always in the circumstances because of family or finances to take that plunge. So it sounds like, maybe that candidate, that executive, was that their first time with a startup, I wonder, or?
That was their first time in a real executive role. And I think they didn't understand that, it was hard to ask the team to work 60 hours a week when they were checking in Monday at noon and leaving Thursday. And, and in those days, remote work was much harder and we didn't have Zoom and everything so people were kind of out of touch when they were out of the office, and it just culturally didn't send the right message. And as well as just obvious, his buy-in was just not at the same level as the rest of the team.
Mm-hmm. So how'd it go the third time? Was third time the charm?
Third time was the charm. I found somebody that was from Austin that was out of the industry. I actually proposed to the board that they could be CEO. They were pretty senior executive who had a lot of experience, and went to the board and said, hey, I've got this guy, but he's kind of interested in the CEO role. The board said, no, we're not interested in him as CEO, but if he wants to come in and as kind of an executive VP and run sales and marketing, that's okay. And so that's the deal we struck. And he was able to stay with the company for a period of years and well into our very successful run that we had with the organization. And so that worked. But it took me 3 tries to get a marketing VP and a couple of tries to get a sales VP as well. But that's probably a story for a different day.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I joined a startup in Austin we'll call it the beginning of 2001. Venture backed. They had also raised like 10 or 11 million in the first round. And like you said, very early stage. And marketing and sales was the biggest department of turnover, area of turnover. A couple of different VPs, a couple of different sales VPs, lots of sales people. So, I'm curious, like, what you were able to do as you were into other companies to, avoid the best you can hiring mistakes or trying to reduce the churn.
Yeah, so hiring for a startup particularly is the hardest thing, especially in those days. I had no reputation. It's a little easier for me today to say, point to successes and say, don't you want to learn from somebody who's been there and done that? But I was a 35-year-old kid basically who had just raised $11 million, but that was about the only credential I had to my name at that point.
Yeah,
and so it's very tough. And I think most of the time startups hire too many executives and not enough Indians, as the famous phrase, too many chiefs, not enough Indians, and that you need to hire people at the right stage. And then the challenge you run into is some of those people may be able to grow into bigger roles as the company gets bigger, but some of those people don't. And you got to be careful you don't hire somebody to a VP position when they're really a individual contributor or maybe first level manager in their skill set and ability at that point in time. And so hiring at the early stage is very difficult, but I think, stay away from hiring high level execs more than, one. You only need one or two of those until you're at 50 or 60 or something. And really, you get traction and you get product market fit and you think, then you're really building a company. Okay. Then you can bring some more of those people in, but you don't need a lot of those people in the early days.
Yeah. So it sounds like there was a reflection around hiring an executive versus somebody to roll up their sleeves and do the marketing. Exactly. And that's what you need in the early days of the company, is somebody who's going to get in and do the work. And a lot of people think they can do that, but once you've reached a point in your career where you've spent most of your time managing, often that's very hard to get people to return to that. And so with the 30 years of CEO experience, there are a lot of lessons that you've shared, a previous book and things that you talk about. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more generally? Are there mistakes? What are some of the mistakes that CEOs make, maybe not just in hiring, but in evaluating the performance of the executives on their team?
Yeah, I think there's a concept that people often think to be a manager, to be a coach, to be a leader of a group of people, you have to know more about how they do their job than they do. You have to be the expert, because that's how most people get into management. You're very good as an individual contributor, and then somebody makes you a manager, and you're managing junior people who you can instruct in how to do the job. And that's true through most of the roles in an organization until you get to this role of CEO, where it is impossible to be the expert. I tell people I'm unqualified to be the executive VP of any functional area of the business, even though I think I'm a pretty good CEO. And they say, well, wait a minute, how does that work? And, one of the analogies I use is the NFL. I often ask the question in training of what position did Bill Belichick, arguably the greatest coach in NFL history, play in the NFL?
Yeah.
And a few people often go, wait a minute, I don't think Bill Belichick played in the NFL. And that's the correct answer. Yeah. He didn't. How can you be the greatest coach in the history of the NFL if you never played? Because the head coach role is very much like a CEO role. You want to be what I call an expert generalist in that role. You need to know a little bit about everything, but you can't be an expert in any of in any more than maybe one of the areas, right? Because you're going to have somebody working for you who spent their whole career being a salesperson and a sales manager and a sales executive. They're going to know more about sales. So then you have to think about, how do I guide somebody that's in that role? And so that comes down to setting very clear objectives, having clear conversations, making sure that their view of their job aligns with your vision for where the organization's going, that their vision of how they do their job integrates with the other departments and works cohesively. Just like a football plan, you can have an offensive plan, you have a defensive plan, but it's a lot better if those work together and fit the type of player you can recruit into your organization. And so those are the kind of things that the CEO's dealing with. You're not going to be able to tell them exactly how to close this deal or that deal, And you got to be comfortable with that. By setting very clear objectives, though, and then you provide accountability by judging those objectives against what I call objective reality. People use the word accountability. I don't think often people, when they use that word, just mean they want to fire somebody. I tell people, substitute accountability, substitute the word objective reality. Your job's to provide objective reality to all your execs, and say, just like when Tom Brady throws a pass 10 yards over the receiver's head, the natural human inclinations to say, well, that wasn't my fault. The receiver ran the wrong route, or he slipped, or the offensive lineman didn't block and the defender was in my face. And the coach's job is to provide objective reality and say, no, Tom, you overthrew him. You threw a bad pass or you made the wrong read, or whatever the case may be. And so that's what you're trying to provide to your executive team.
I mean, it's interesting to think about Belichick for a minute. He has this reputation now. He will be going to the Hall of Fame. Some
Absolutely.
would call him the greatest coach ever. In his first stint as a coach in the Cleveland Browns, my grandmother was still alive then. Northeastern Ohio would go on and on. She thought Bill Belichick was terrible and
right.
He's playing the wrong quarterback and blah, blah, blah. And so then he gets the job with the Patriots, and Drew Bledsoe gets hurt. He ends up with Tom Brady, and what seems like a stroke of genius and years of genius. There's this debate now that Tom Brady's in Tampa Bay.
Right. How
good is Belichick without Brady? So the question I wanted to throw to you, Joel, is, if let's say you've got a CEO and a sales VP or a chief revenue officer who's been joined at the hip with the CEO, the company's doing great, growing for 5 or 6 or 10 years. And then the sales VP leaves. Does that sometimes expose the CEO or raise questions of, well, for what it's worth, who gets credit for the success?
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately the CEO is responsible for the team he puts on the field. Mm-hmm. And so, just like deciding on going with Brady, a 6th round draft pick who, nobody else wanted because they could have had him much earlier. He was at least smart enough to pick him, right? Yeah. And then chose to go with him over a more experienced quarterback as soon as he showed promise. So you give the CEO credit for that because, if he got the wrong quarterback, it was his fault as well. And so I think the same thing's true with CEOs. Your executive team is absolutely critical, not just sales, but the whole executive team. But you're responsible for making it work. And if you don't have the right people, so many CEOs are very slow to move when they don't have the right executive in place. And I think that's critical because ultimately you're going to be judged on their performance. And so if they're not the right guy, you've got to move pretty quickly on those things.
Yeah. So I've got some other questions for you about your experience as CEO. But I do have to ask, how do you end up CEO of 2 companies at the same time? Elon Musk is maybe he's your neighbor now, but he's the most famous example these days, I think, of being CEO at Tesla and SpaceX. Steve Jobs, I think at one point was pulling that off between the company I'm blanking out, the company he had been with before. Yeah, Next Computers and Apple. Right. When they brought him back. But how did you end up in that situation, Joel? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so as you get older and get on the investing side, often you and board side, you often end up in CEO roles not through planning but through happenstance. So my last 2 CEO roles have been because I was standing at the right place or the wrong place at the right time. I'm not sure which. So I was CEO of a public company called Black Box, and there that happened because I was on the board. The company was struggling, and so the board comes to a decision to fire the CEO, but the company's struggling, and it's hard to find, how are you going to find a CEO when the company owes the bank $165 million and you've got turnover and all these issues? And so, you look around the boardroom, and I was the only guy not collecting Social Security on the board. So I got voluntold that was that I could take it over, right? Yeah. And then most recently, iGrafx, I took over, and I've now left that position. We actually sold the company very recently, but I took over that company because my private equity firm that I ran and sat on the board of iGrafx, the CEO there decided to leave, told us he was leaving. And we were kind of in the midst of this transaction process. We thought we were going to sell the business. And so, again, bringing in a new CEO didn't make a lot of sense at that point in time. So I kind of jumped in and pinch hit for 6 months to get the company through a transaction. So, yeah, sometimes you find yourself in these roles and you kind of got to do double duty.
So, and iGrafx, back in the day, in my engineering days, I used to use that software. So that name,
Sure. Yeah.
I looked at the website and, it said celebrating 30 years. And I think, well, I was probably using the software 20 years ago, maybe when I was working in Austin. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. They've been in the business process management space for a long time.
Yeah. So Joel, I wanted to ask, thinking of your different CEO roles, here on the podcast, the theme is, learning from mistakes, not repeating mistakes, being open about mistakes. What are your thoughts about, creating a culture, your role of creating a culture where people are learning from mistakes?
Yeah, I think the two most powerful phrases that CEOs need to use is, I don't know, and I made a mistake.
Yeah.
And too many CEOs, you could spend a year with them and they'd never utter either one of those phrases. And that's a challenge, right? Because it's really hard to believe people, because none of us are right all the time. I mean, I used to try to tell my kids when they were little that I knew, Daddy knows everything. And they believed that to about 6 years old, and then they started going, well, Google it, Daddy. I don't believe you, and so, that doesn't work. But a lot of CEOs think they have to have all the answers, and they are just unwilling to utter those words. I don't know. And then when they make a decision, they stick with it, and they're stubborn about it, and they're unwilling to reconsider, even though evidence has come about that shows you're wrong. And so they're not willing to say, hey, I missed that one. We're going to change direction. And so those are the two most powerful phrases, because I wanted everybody in my organization to consider me. The two words I want people to use to describe me were authentic and transparent. And you can't be authentic and transparent if you're covering up your mistakes and if you're acting like you know everything when you know you don't.
Wow. So that's, thank you. I mean, that's powerful. And, I think we all wish we worked in a company where that was the case. I'm fortunate, one software company I'm involved with right now, I'm wearing their hat, KaiNexus, has a CEO who believes and lives what you were saying there, Joel. He's not afraid to say, I don't know. He doesn't try to micromanage. I've heard very similar thing from him about, he's not expert in any of the disciplines or the functions as that company has grown to 30 people. He's got the humility to hire experts. And, he had a good mentor who had stepped in as an interim CEO for the purpose of coaching him, because he was a first-time entrepreneur.
Sure.
And, but I think that humility and that openness and creating a culture, just the other thing I'll say about KaiNexus is, a culture of not jumping to blame and punish people when a simple mistake is made. Because when you do that, it seems like you just drive people into hiding or covering up their mistakes, which isn't good, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. There's a great story in the book American Icon about Ford and how Owen Mahaly turned around Ford, and without taking government money, and he goes into the executive meeting each week, and he asks people to rate their projects, kind of red, yellow, green. And the first week he goes in, everybody around the whole boardroom's green, and Ford's going to lose $3.5 billion in that quarter alone. And his response is, boy, that's interesting, and until he broke through, and it took, several weeks before somebody finally threw up a yellow and mentioned that they had a problem. And his first words out of his mouth were, thank you. Yeah. Now we have something to work with. And so that's what I coach CEOs is anytime somebody brings a problem to you, the first words out of your mouth need to be, thank you. Thank you for letting me know that we had a problem. Now let's talk about how we're going to solve it and who's going to go solve it. But if you build that into your culture, that you thank people for bringing you problems, you'll find they start bringing you more and more problems. And they bring you problems when they're little problems, small fires, instead of after they've blown up and there's really no way to solve the problem.
Yeah, it's better to be told we're behind schedule earlier when there's a chance to adjust and get back on schedule until waiting until it's late. I told you it was on schedule, but now, oops, that's not going to ship, right?
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard that Mullally story. I'm pretty certain that the first executive to report yellow was Mark Fields, who then I believe ended up replacing Mullally as CEO. Yep. So
exactly.
And ended up in Mullally's good graces for doing that.
Yeah, and of course, everybody else was looking around the boardroom thinking there was an ejector button that Mullally was about to push, because the culture was so toxic that you just didn't bring problems up. And that's how you get in a situation where you're losing $3.5 billion.
Yeah. Well, and, Mullally was brought in, of course, from Boeing. And, so, question for you, Joel. I mean, generally speaking, when do you have to bring in an outsider to have a chance to shake up a culture?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the whole question of how to hire CEOs is not been that well explored, in my opinion. Most boards don't do it very often, so not a lot of expertise around doing it. But I think in general, I would love to have somebody from internal take over. And part of a good CEO job is preparing a transition plan. And always having that in place, because, the proverbial bus can hit anybody, anything can happen. They can get a better offer. They can have a health issue, whatever. So that's a key board responsibility, is there always should be discussions about, is there anyone internally? What do we need to do to make the internal candidates more qualified so that they'd be in a better position? So, I much prefer doing internal because I know something. But a lot of times companies, especially the ones that aren't well run, get into trouble, and there is no person because the CEO has not prepared transition, and the CEO was not very transparent in the way they ran the business. And so nobody kind of knows, none of the internal people really have seen much of the business. And that's when you got to go outside. And then certainly there are times when events happen and you just need to change the culture. You need to change, you're needing to push a significant change in the organization. And that's much more easily done from the outside than from the inside, because it's very hard for an inside candidate to come in and, try to, you ask them, they need to fire half the executive team or something. That's very difficult because these were their peers, and culturally, that's very hard to gain that credibility and do that quickly. So, it's kind of a general rule. If things are going well, I'd love to much prefer an inside candidate. If things are not going well, then I'm going to probably look more outside.
So one other question I want to ask, this is sort of going back to hiring, whether it's hiring other executives or team members for a startup. You're in Austin, and you made reference to the phrase of, keep Austin weird. Well, a lot of times companies might not want to be weird, or there's this phrase that's used, they hire for fit. And does that exclude people? Is it a mistake to maybe keep out those who are weird or different, who are quote unquote not a fit? What's your experience with this?
Yeah, you have to be careful about what that means, what fit means. And if you build a very strong culture, and we can stay with the Bill Belichick analogy here. So, New England Patriots, very famous for taking players that fail on other teams, that are the problem child, or whatever, a troublemaker, whatever. And, New England brings them into their organization and they perform wonderfully. They, become an all-pro, they win Super Bowls, whatever. And the reason that happens is because if you have a very strong culture, your culture impacts the person. If you have a weak culture, then these misfits impact your culture.
Yeah.
And so you want to have a very strong culture, which allows you to hire a lot wider array of people, because you're going to influence them. Your strong culture is going to impact them more than their, maybe lack of fit is going to impact you. And the tendency, of course, for all of us is to hire people that are like ourselves. And that's, that can be ethnically, that can be personality wise. I mean, that's what I probably see in tech the most, is the personality. A lot of us in tech are very, tech entrepreneurs, very driven, very direct kind of people, A-type personalities. And so they tend to hire other A-type personalities. And it's not case of they don't want diversity. They just don't understand. They think that's the reason they're successful is because of their personality. So everybody that's successful has their personality, and that's just a misnomer. And it takes kind of all types of personalities to make the world go round. And as you grow an organization, you're going to have to learn to deal with all types of personalities. So we spend a lot of time in our training talking about language to describe people, so that you can even have this conversation about how to include all different personality types, and that somebody that may be perceived to push back in your organization, there may just be somebody who's more risk averse than you are, and you're very risk tolerant, and you just need to understand they're going to need a week to get to that new idea, and you got to it in 5 minutes and we're willing to change the whole direction of the company. Some people aren't going to be comfortable with that. And if you know that ahead of time, though, you can give them a heads up a week ahead. Hey, we're going to go talk about this. Give them time to process and get there. And, they can be just as productive as anybody else.
Back to Bill Belichick again. I forget if these were his comments somehow. It's how I'm remembering it. But there's the idea of putting 11 Tom Brady's on the field would not be a winning football team.
Yes.
Because you need clearly fit for a left tackle versus a running back. Tom Brady's not going to play either of those positions well, even though you might want players who have some of the characteristics or traits of Tom Brady, or somebody who can fit into a system seems to be important in business as well.
Yeah. And I mean, just different roles, right? I mean, a customer support person by nature needs to be much more people centric. A developer needs to be much more thing centric, right? I mean, they're going to be, and that's just natural personality traits. But to build a successful and balanced organization, you need all of those. And if you hire just a bunch of developers and, they have to do customer support, that doesn't work very well, yeah. But that's what you see in a lot of tech companies. You see, the one I've dealt with, has like 30 engineers and 3 other people. And I'm like, hey guys, we might want to get some other types in here to kind of balance this out, because our customers, are not going to all be engineers. Or the people that doing support need to be different. The HR people need to be different. The accounting people maybe need to be different. And so understanding that, how you're different, how you're unique, and then therefore what other types you need is very important.
Well, I think that's great advice, Joel. And again, our guest is Joel Trammell. He's got a new book coming out. As they say in Texas, this is not his first rodeo as an author. He's got a previous book from 2014, The CEO Tightrope, How to Master the Balancing Act of a Successful CEO. And the new book, it sounds like a broader focus. It's called The Manager's Playbook, Make Exceptional People Management Your Competitive Advantage. So it's not there's a line break there that I didn't read well. It's not make exceptional people, it's make exceptional people management,
yes,
your competitive advantage. Is the audience for this book managers at all level, including a CEO?
Yeah, yes, there is absolutely, a management role, all the way up, including the CEO, that I think has been neglected in many organizations, viewed as not important. A lot of the business literature really focuses on leadership, which is one component, I would say, of the management role. But it's not the only component. We talk about 3 distinct components. We talk about management, which is making decisions about those things you control because of your position. We talk about leadership, influencing others to willingly follow. And then we talk about coaching, continuous process of making your team better. And all 3 of those tools need to be engaged to be successful. And so that's what we talk about in the manager's playbook is you got to be careful. A lot of people only use one or more. They get into a management role and they think, wow, I get to make all the decisions now. And they just make decisions. Then they wonder why nobody's following them and nobody's getting any better. And then some people are very leadership oriented and everybody likes them, is excited, but they don't make good decisions and nobody knows where we're going. And it doesn't work as well. And so we believe you need kind of be able to apply all 3 of those tools to be a successful manager in an organization.
So is the management piece the one that you think is most often missing? Is that why the focus on this book? Or
yeah, it is missing or overused. It often is either neglected. People just say, I I run by consensus is kind of a common approach these days, right? I don't make these decisions. We build a consensus, which to me is just the stupidest thing in the world. It's like the quarterback going into the huddle and saying, okay, well, let's figure out what play, who want offensive lineman. What play do you want to run? Okay. Wide receiver. Well, I mean, they don't have the view, they're not the general on the field. They don't have the view of the whole situation.
Well, and that takes time. The play clock would expire, and now you've got a delay penalty.
Yes, exactly. And so, somebody with a view of the overall field calls the play, and then everybody executes accordingly. And then the other thing I see, kind of the inverse of that, is the person who gets made a manager and thinks, oh, yes, now I get to make all the decisions, but that's all I have to do is make a decision, and everybody's just going to eagerly follow my direction. And if you've had any experience in managing people, you know that doesn't happen. They often will do what you ask them to do, but with far less enthusiasm than you need. And most of us managing people in knowledge worker categories, we need not just their physical engagement, but we need their mental and creative engagement. And the only way you get that is through exercising good leadership.
Well, Joel, you've shared a lot of really great insights and thought-provoking ideas here today. So I trust the book will be full of those as well. So I'll look forward to seeing the book when it comes out. And I hope people will go check it out. Again, The Manager's Playbook: Make Exceptional People Management Your Competitive Advantage. I think I said it a little better that time.
Yeah, I think you got it right.
I put people management on the same line this time. Try to avoid repeating that little mistake. But again, our guest has been Joel Trammell. Joel, you seem like a really busy guy, so thank you for making the time to be a guest here today.
Great to be with you, Mark.